Welcome back to Politics Watch JA. In today's video, we're diving into two major promises that are making waves ahead of the upcoming general election. First, we'll unpack Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness' critique of the People's National Party's PNP housing plan, which promises down payments for first-time home buyers. Holness argues it could drive up home prices even further, but is this a real concern? Or just more political posturing? Then, we'll take a closer look at PNP President Mark Golding's bold pledge to address the long-standing issue of beach access in Jamaica, a problem that has frustrated coastal residents for years. Golding promises a paradigm shift in who gets to enjoy our beaches, especially those controlled by private properties and hotels. But is this the breakthrough Jamaicans have been waiting for? Or just another election promise? Don't forget to like, share, and comment below. We want to hear your thoughts on these issues. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss out on our critical analysis of Jamaican politics. Stick around as we break down both sides of the story. Let's dive in. Before I start with today's topic, Politics Watch JA is taking the time out to say happy birthday to the best Prime Minister Jamaica has ever had. Nuff blessing. May Jehovah God continue to bless you abundantly and guide you in all things. Always seek His will. And may He protect and uplift you as you continue to lead our great nation. Your wife's birthday, followed by your anniversary, and then your own birthday, 2 weeks of celebrations. Truly a time to rejoice and reflect. Wishing you many more years of health, happiness, and success. May God continue to guide and protect you in all your endeavors. Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness took a jab at an election promise by the opposition People's National Party, PNP, to provide housing as well as down payments on the units, saying that it could drive up the cost of homes on the market. Dr. Holness' response centers on a concern that the PNP's proposal could inflate the cost of homes. And it highlights a fundamental issue. How will the PNP fund this initiative without overburdening taxpayers or jeopardizing essential services like health and education? The fundamental question here is not just about the cost of the grants but also the associated costs of constructing 50,000 homes. Critics of the PNP's plan, including Dr. Holness, are asking how such a large-scale housing project will be funded. Given Jamaica's current fiscal challenges, high debt levels, IMF oversight, and inflation, the skepticism around this promise is understandable. It's easy to make promises about housing and grants, but when it comes to the sustainability of such promises, questions about funding and debt become unavoidable. The argument that this could push Jamaica back into the hands of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, by worsening the country's fiscal position resonates with those who are wary of taking on additional debt for politically expedient projects. The critique here is that short-term political gains might be prioritized over long-term fiscal health, leading to greater burdens down the road, particularly for marginalized groups like farmers, who could lose out on loans to expand their businesses. There are growing sentiments among some Jamaicans that the current government is more focused on political point scoring and maneuvering than addressing the serious challenges facing citizens. The criticism of Holness could be seen as not just a rejection of his argument but also a demand for action that voters may feel has been lacking. Holness' statement also taps into a broader problem faced by politicians globally, where promises made during election campaigns, regardless of their feasibility, can often come under scrutiny once in power. Holness seems to be focusing on the unrealistic nature of the opposition's promises without offering a robust solution of his own, which could be seen as a political tactic, leaving the housing issue unresolved while criticizing the opponent's plan. The core issue at the heart of this debate is the housing crisis in Jamaica. The stark reality is that many young people, particularly public sector workers, are unable to afford homes due to the high cost of real estate. The critique of Holness, as well as support for the PNP's plan, points to a clear demand for action in addressing this crisis. Here are a few critical observations. Housing affordability is a huge issue, particularly for young Jamaicans under 35. The assertion that no public sector worker can afford any housing solutions that this government is promoting speaks to the gap between the price of housing and people's ability to pay for it. Public sector workers, teachers, nurses, police officers often feel excluded from the dream of homeownership due to these high costs. While Dr. Holness focuses on the potential inflationary effects of the PNP's plan, the PNP's housing proposal attempts to tackle the problem directly by providing support for first-time buyers. Whether this is sufficient to address the root causes of high property prices is another question. There's also a question about whether short-term solutions, like grants, can fix a systemic problem, the overall price inflation of housing. This is where the debate really becomes complex. Can targeted financial assistance, such as the Jamaican $500,000 grant, address the underlying causes of rising prices, such as speculative development, inflation, and insufficient supply? The suggestion that the Jamaican $500,000 grant could lead to a debt trap is an important concern. Critics of the plan argue that if these grants are not properly managed, they could ultimately be unsustainable, potentially adding to the country's already heavy debt burden. If these grants are not tied to a sustainable fiscal framework, they could lead to inflationary pressures and result in an overall increase in housing prices, nullifying the impact of the grant for those it's meant to help. However, supporters of the plan, particularly those who feel excluded from homeownership, view the Jamaican $500,000 grant as a step in the right direction. For many living paycheck to paycheck and unable to save for a down payment, this could be seen as a lifeline. It's possible that, for these individuals, the alternative, continued exclusion from homeownership, may seem far worse than taking on the risk of a potential debt burden. Moreover, if the grants were paired with other mechanisms to reduce housing inflation, stabilize the market, or incentivize affordable housing construction, the grants could have more lasting effects. The debate between Prime Minister Holness and the PNP over the housing grant reflects deeper questions about economic sustainability, fiscal responsibility, and the government's capacity to address systemic problems like housing. On one hand, Holness' concerns about the long-term financial impacts of the PNP's proposal are valid and should be addressed. On the other hand, the need for immediate action on housing is pressing, especially for young people struggling with exorbitant prices. Ultimately, the solution may not lie in rejecting one proposal or another, but in finding ways to balance short-term support, like grants, with long-term policy reforms that stabilize the housing market, encourage affordable development, and prevent further price inflation. Without such a multifaceted approach, housing will remain an insurmountable barrier for many Jamaicans, regardless of which party is in power. The promise made by PNP President Mark Golding to grant better access to Jamaica's beaches if the party is elected introduces a key issue in both the political landscape and social justice conversation. While the policy shift may appeal to those who feel excluded from certain public spaces, especially beaches tied to private properties and tourist resorts, there are multiple layers to analyze in terms of feasibility, public support, economic implications, and political motivation. Golding's pledge taps directly into a widespread grievance among Jamaicans, particularly those in coastal communities, who have long felt disenfranchised from their own natural resources. Many beaches, which should theoretically be public, have been increasingly restricted by hotels, private developments, and wealthy property owners, effectively creating a divide between the local population and the tourism sector. The promise to grant more access to these beaches is framed as a response to the social inequality that has resulted from this restricted access. It touches on historical issues of land ownership and access to public spaces, which have disproportionately impacted lower-income and rural communities. For many Jamaicans, beaches are not just recreational spaces but also symbols of cultural. This type of policy could resonate deeply with disgruntled Jamaicans, especially those who feel their rights to freely access natural resources have been compromised by privatization. The promise to address these inequities is likely to stir support among disenfranchised voters, especially in coastal towns and rural areas that rely on beach access for subsistence and tourism opportunities. While the intent behind the promise is noble, the practicalities of it raise several important questions. Many tourism stakeholders and private property owners may push back against such a move, arguing that it would infringe upon their property rights or disrupt their business operations. Tourism is a key driver of Jamaica's economy, And any policy that threatens the interests of investors and hotel chains could face significant opposition. A significant challenge will be the legal status of beachfront properties. Many beachfront lands, even if they are near public or government-owned spaces, are privately owned, often by hotel chains or wealthy individuals. Enforcing public access to these spaces may require changes to property laws, which could be a politically and legally complicated process. If the government were to open up private beaches, there would also be the question of how to manage the infrastructure, parking, waste management, security, etc., and safety on beaches that may have been designed for exclusive use by hotel guests. Opening up these beaches could lead to overcrowding and strain on resources. A paradigm shift in how beaches are managed could have far-reaching implications for Jamaica's tourism industry. Jamaica's economy is heavily dependent on tourism, and some may see this policy as a conflict between local access and the country's desire to maintain its appeal as a luxury tourist destination. The government would need to balance local access with the need to maintain quality and exclusivity for tourists, especially high-end visitors who spend more in the local economy. Critics of the policy may argue that opening up beaches could undermine the value proposition of high-end resorts and hotels. On the other hand, local tourism could see a boost if Jamaicans are able to frequent these areas, potentially creating a more inclusive economy where more people benefit from the tourism industry, not just the elite. Increased access to beaches could also have positive spin-offs, such as creating jobs in coastal communities where local vendors, guides, and other tourism-related businesses could flourish. It's no coincidence that the promise was made in the lead-up to a general election. This move can be seen as a strategic appeal to the electorate, particularly disenfranchised groups who feel their interests have been ignored by previous administrations. By positioning the PNP as the champion of local rights, Golding is tapping into a strong vein of public dissatisfaction with the current government's handling of land and beach access. However, this proposal raises the question of how realistic it is in the context of a politically polarized environment. If past promises have not been followed through or have faced significant pushback, there is the possibility that some may view this as another empty election promise. Here is also an underlying tension between the elite classes, who may have large land holdings and private resorts, and the working class majority, who often feel excluded from the benefits of Jamaica's natural resources. Golding's promise appears to speak directly to this class divide, which could resonate with voters who feel disconnected from the political establishment. Public opinion in Jamaica is increasingly politicized and sensitive when it comes to issues like land access, particularly in coastal regions where many people have a deep connection to the natural environment. A policy change like the one Golding is suggesting could galvanize public support, especially from those who are disillusioned with the current status quo. By focusing on a promise that directly affects the lives of ordinary Jamaicans, Golding could mobilize the grassroots support of communities who feel neglected by both the government and private interests. This aligns with the PNP's traditional base, which has often aligned with workers' rights and the protection of local communities. On the flip side, such a policy could spark a backlash from private landowners and businesses in the tourism sector. Hotel owners may argue that opening up their private beach properties would hurt their bottom line, and foreign investors could become wary of future investment prospects if property rights are not clearly protected. Mark Golding's promise to address beach access and public ownership taps into a real and deep-seated issue in Jamaican society, where many believe that access to natural resources like beaches should be available to all citizens, not just the wealthy or tourists. On the surface, the policy appears appealing and could significantly boost the PNP's popularity among disgruntled voters who feel excluded. However, the policy raises several practical concerns that need careful consideration, such as legal feasibility, the economic impact on tourism, and the potential for backlash from private landowners. Balancing local access with the need for a thriving tourism industry will be key to the success of any such policy. Ultimately, whether this promise is a genuine move towards social justice or simply a political play ahead of elections remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that the issue of beach access is a significant point of contention in Jamaica, and how it is addressed in the coming months could have lasting implications for the relationship between the government, private property owners, and ordinary citizens. Thanks for watching Politics Watch JA. We hope this video gave you a deeper look at the election promises shaping Jamaica's future. What do you think? Is the PNP's housing plan a game changer or just another election move? Will Golding's promise to tackle beach access actually change things for Jamaicans? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed today's analysis, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth discussions on Jamaican politics. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. Until next time, this is Politics Watch JA, keeping you informed, one issue at a time.